Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the OK Grognard Show. It is Thursday, August 27th, 2020, 9:30 a.m. Central in beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. It's gotten hot again this week. We're up into the 80s. I think we're up as high as 90 plus earlier this week. Hopefully, we're going to see some cooling off this weekend, according to the weatherchannel.com, whatever app thing. It's supposed to get up to like 86 today, and then I don't know, down into the 70s for Saturday and Sunday. And next Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday, starting to go back up a little bit for Ernie Gygax's birthday, Wednesday, September 2nd. Don't forget that date. And 70s through the rest of the week next week. So once we drop down out of the 80s, we're going to be in pretty decent weather. But man, that's hot going into September. I got to say, I don't see a lot of rain in the forecast. But as we know from the last month, these storms can come out of nowhere. They can be severe thunderstorms with incredible amounts of lightning. We saw a bunch of trees downed earlier this week. Last week, we had a tornado rip through town. So, if you're trying to predict any of this weather by looking at the forecast, temperatures seem to be pretty much what they're saying they're going to be. But the rest of this, I don't know. GMing tips, random advice from the 1E DMG. Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. That's what I put on the schedule for today. And then as I was flipping through the book just prior to showtime, I saw a section that I don't spend a lot of time talking about, either face to face or online. Anyway, what's it all about? Well, as I've said before, we started off original, then went into advanced. By the time the DMG came around, I was 5 years into playing. I was in my late teens. So I'd been to several, 2, 3, I think, Gen Cons at that point. It's probably where I got, if I recall, picked up the DMG. Or did I win that one? Well, let's see. I won the Monster Manual in a contest. I think I bought the Player's Handbook, and I think I won the DMG in an event. So the Monster Manual was a radio contest. I'll have to talk about that one of these days. Maybe I have already. It's not a secret story. Anywho, one of the things, as I was saying, that I probably don't talk about enough is handling troublesome players. So, there are a million schools of thought, and there are a million variables to deal with when it comes to dealing with this situation, right? Let me read what they say. And then I'm going to break some of that down because some of it will fly with me and some of it probably will not. Handling troublesome players. Some players will find more enjoyment in spoiling a game than in playing it. And this ruins the fun for the rest of the participants, so it must be prevented. Those who enjoy being loud and argumentative, those who pout or act in a childish manner when things go against them, those who use the books as a defense whenever you rule them out of line, should be excluded from the campaign. Simply put, ask them to leave and do not invite them to participate again. That is the first paragraph. It lays out who they think will ruin your game for your other players and for you. And it tells you what to do. Send them back. And let's read a little more. Peer pressure is another means which can be used to control players who are not totally obnoxious and who you deem worth saving. These types typically attempt to give orders and instructions even when their characters are not present, tell other characters what to do even though the character role they have has nothing to do with that of the one being instructed, or continually attempt actions or activities their characters would have no knowledge of. When any such proposals or suggestions or orders are made, simply inform the group that that is no longer possible under any circumstances because of the player in question. The group will then act to silence him or her and control undesirable outbursts. The other players will most certainly let such individuals know about undesirable activity when it begins to affect their characters and their enjoyments of the game. So, in a nutshell, this paragraph talks about anybody you haven't booted out of the game, who hasn't risen to the level of being boot-worthy, someone who you feel can be brought back into the fold of players who are not ruining the game, then in this case, fob it off on the other players. Somebody says, hey, you should listen at the lock, and they aren't even in the room. Then you just say, hey, that person isn't here. They just gave you advice. I can't let that advice stand, so you're not listening at the lock. But I would have listened at the lock. I could pretend to roll for it, but I'm not going to let you hear anything anyway because they gave you advice from the other room. I don't want people who aren't there suggesting things. Either you're there or you're not. If you're there, suggest things that your character is capable of suggesting. If you're in a silent spell, you can't suggest things verbally. So on and so forth. And if anybody does that sort of thing, I simply got to say, it can't be done now. I'm not going to fake it. I'm not going to pretend you tried and it didn't work. I'm just going to tell you that because that person gave that advice, you can now not take that advice. If somebody tells you to attack and they aren't there, you're not going to be attacking. You might get attacked. So you may want to curb in these other players. Basically, they're saying, put this stuff on the other players to handle for you. It's not necessarily bad advice. We'll get back to it. Last paragraph. Strong steps short of expulsion can be an extra random monster die, obviously rolled. The attack of an ethereal mummy, which always strikes by surprise, naturally. Points of damage from blue bolts from the heavens, striking the offender's head, or permanent loss of a point of charisma, appropriately, from the character belonging to the offender. If these have to be enacted regularly, then they are not effective and stronger measures must be taken. Again, the ultimate answer to such a problem is simply to exclude the disruptive person from further gatherings. Well, I'll tell you, it's fairly binary advice. It is ultimately the most extreme, short of just ending the game, right? You can just say, hey, look, there's just so many of you disruptive players in this game that even if I booted you guys all out, I wouldn't have enough players left to run the game. And I just don't feel like running a game that has a bunch of people who are disruptive in it. So I'm done with my game. It's an interesting idea to go that route. I'm not sure that it's the best thing for the DM. Obviously, the DM is going to miss playing and running a game. So, hard to say. ultimately you have to make the call. Now, here's some factors that they don't discuss in there, which they probably should. And the first of those factors is age. Now, granted, a 60-year-old can act like a 12-year-old, a 12-year-old can act like a 60-year-old, but let's be honest, more 12-year-olds act like 12-year-olds than the other way, than 60-year-olds act like 12-year-olds, and so on and so forth. So, just going by what we would expect the norms to be, some of that advice might be a little harsh if you have a lot of younger players. So too, but to a lesser extent, if you have a lot of inexperienced players. Folks don't know. Until they've played, they don't know what's appropriate or not. I mean, you could lay out all the rules you want. Until the rubber hits the road, people are not going to understand fully what the give and take has to be, what the quote unquote social contract is when you're sitting at a table in a particular GM's game, or just in general with other players in a cooperative role playing game. So you gotta be a little cautious not to overreact, because you may shut down some behavior that is appropriate under certain circumstances, but not always appropriate. So you don't want to give off the vibe that you just disallow absolutely everything at all times. You want to be judicious about the way in which you enforce these things. Now, I think the first paragraph there was talking about repeat offenders, people who are habitually bad behavior, bad actors, disruptive over the course of some period of time. And only you can judge what that is. But if you've got a lot of young players in a game, they're just too young in a lot of circumstances to realize. I mean, I started pretty young. I was 11 or 12 when I started playing, but that's, when role playing games came out. I couldn't have been any younger. And you've got to understand that these younger players are not going to be completely in control of their own emotions, and outbursts are going to happen from time to time. And you can rein them in without being overly strict, overly punitive. There are ways, and you maybe want to allow a little more slack in cases like that, as long as they're getting the message, even if they lose the thread and fall back on bad behaviors. As long as when you give them the message, as long as when you rein them in, they are someone you can rein in. When they're out of control and you can't rein them in anymore, I don't know. Then you got to talk about having them leave the game, whether that's possible. Might be awkward. And I'll tell you, when I started playing, 99% of the time I was playing with other youngsters like myself. Every now and then we'd wind up at a convention in a game with some adults, or at even most of the time at the game clubs we were part of. The younger players tended to gravitate and play together, gravitate toward one another. So, a lot of these problems that I'm discussing as far as younger players are concerned don't really apply in those cases. So you can see that these are things that they don't even discuss in the book. They assume adults, it seems, or they probably would have mentioned it. On the other hand, what they also don't discuss is newer players who can have the same faults that some younger players can have. Not that they won't subside more quickly once you rein those in. Um, but there are cases, especially and it's something else they don't discuss in the book. If there is alcohol or other problems in that way involved, um, you may even have individuals in the game who are on various medications, who aren't the best at having, who maybe are having problems with their physician regulating them properly, or just aren't conscientiously medicating themselves when their physician suggests that they do or recommends that they do. Ultimately, people have a choice whether to take their medication or not, regardless of what's good for them. So you have to make some decisions in that regard. A conversation is almost always in order before any kind of action is taken as a reactive measure for any kinds of behavior. So you do want to make sure you fully understand the situation and you have all the data and all the facts, or as much as can be gleaned, before you make any sorts of decisions. Sometimes that can come very quickly. Sometimes it's easy enough because you know who these people are. And there's another thing they don't really discuss in those 3 paragraphs is sometimes these are friends. Sometimes I've gathered a group to play and they're people I've just met. Sometimes I'm running an event at a convention or a game day and I don't know anybody. I will never see them again and I've never seen them before. Sometimes they're people I see periodically at some of these events because they're in one part of the country, I'm in another part of the country, but we converge. This is even more so true with online play now. You have people playing in your game from all over the world, and you don't necessarily know who they are. Maybe you know them from Facebook or Twitter or some other social media, MeWe, maybe from Discord. Maybe you're familiar with them through watching a video they do on Twitch or YouTube. But maybe they don't know you. So maybe they don't know you as well or can't know you as well because you're on that end of the camera and they're on this end of the camera. You don't know. There's a lot of factors, and many of these factors obviously don't come into play in 1979, but some of them do, and they're not addressed in there. So, just by way of review, let's just say it's pretty cut and dry. The DMG is pretty good in most circumstances about making sure that ultimately the DM gets to decide what factors get included in these decisions. Ink Dweller 8, Lexfire 22, what up? So, extreme or not extreme? Do we find booting somebody from a game to be a hardship? I mean, if it's going to raise your own stress to an unacceptable level, to have to agonize over whether or not to boot somebody from the game and then to actually go through the process of doing it, some people don't have it in them, and I mean, good for you that you have the level of empathy that completely cuts off that avenue of solution. I suppose in some ways that's a good thing, right? Is that you care enough about other people that you would never boot them from the game, But keep in mind, and this is touched on in those 3 paragraphs, you are in charge of this game. Not just because you want to have fun for yourself. You're not just running this game for yourself. This is a game you're running for other players. And if one of them's being disruptive, if one of them's a bad actor, has behavior issues at the table, and it's affecting everybody. So you've got 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe more other players, 8, 9 in some cases. I've run games with full tables like that and wound up with just 1 or 2 players that were just constantly problematic, disruptive, and I've had some that I've had a discussion with, and it was obvious that it wasn't going to change. And I said, well, this just isn't a good fit. And I think they understood that. And I've had others where the same behaviors are repeated over and over, and it's a problematic thing, and you keep trying to rein them in, and sometimes it's tough. Sometimes you realize that some people just have something in them, and it's probably not their fault, but that behavior is going to resurface from time to time. And if you can just deal with it in the moment and move on, so it's addressed, it's not ignored, but we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, because that is ultimately what takes up game time and ruins the game. Provided it isn't something that creates irreversible damage to the game. You can't unring a bell, right? So if they do something that blows a game out for other players, well, then you got to do something more. But if it's behavior that can be reined in quickly and easily, and you can just move on, maybe you can let it go. That's my feeling, anyway. Any thoughts in the chat over there? We got a few people hanging out. Got you guys all down there on the list. I see Hobbs in the list. I see Ink Dweller 8, Lexfire 22. If you have any thoughts on troublesome players, feel free to jump in. I just read through the DMG first edition AD&D advice for troublesome players. It's 3 short paragraphs. It's 7 or 8 sentences total, right? Maybe 9, 10 sentences total. So everything you said makes complete and total sense. Okay, cool. So yeah, yeah, and I'm not saying anything that is all that groundbreaking here. I'm perhaps just vocalizing what maybe most people think about and consider. Maybe just touching on all of these things in one moment. Because I'll tell you what, if you're on a message board or Facebook or some sort of social media and the question comes up and you mention one part, one kernel of that, you will have at least a few people jump in and say, yeah, you say this, but this thing's more important. Well, I would have included that, but I'm not covering everything here. I'm throwing in my 2 cents as part of the advice. I'm not writing a thesis on everything that should be included within your frame of reference when dealing with troublesome players. This, however, it's me going on for 10 or 15 minutes. I've probably covered the majority of what you'd want to consider when dealing with a situation like that. But who knows? If something else pops up in the next week, maybe I'll bring it up. Where are we at? Oh, what do we need to look at for the rest of this week? I think We've gotten, you know what? Well, we're going to do more random advice from time to time. I think that's good. So, maybe on certain Tuesdays or Wednesdays, if anybody has some ideas on some things to talk about for GMing tips, let me know. But also, keep working on those submissions for Virtual Gamehole Con. I know a bunch of you are going. I think there's at least a dozen of us who are part of the show or the audience here that have badges now for sure. So we should have a good representation. Should be a lot of fun. Later this week, tomorrow, Building Adventures. We got GM reviews on Saturday, Rules retrospective on Sunday, Weekly news and announcements Monday, Cartography and World Building Tuesday, Campaign discussion on Wednesday. Back around the horn to GMing tips next Thursday. I want to thank everybody who follows the show. If you come here and you check the show out and you're not a follower, I urge you to do so. And once you're a follower, make sure you chime in on the stream chat, because we keep a little list, and once a week on Mondays, we give away something to some lucky person from the followers who chimed in the previous week. Just a little something to say hello, and there's no purchase necessary. The only reason we needed to chime in is so that we don't wind up chasing a bot trying to give them something. As far as YouTube is concerned, thank you very much if you're watching over there too. Be sure to subscribe. Give us a thumbs up. Maybe make a comment. Constructive criticism is always a good thing. Once again, thanks to everybody. And tomorrow, we will hopefully have a good time then too. I'm seeing a weird thing on the stream here where I seem to be stuck on the screen. Well, you must be able to hear me. Thank you very much. Thanks to everybody who's there. Have a great day, and we will catch you 9:30 a.m. tomorrow, the next day, the day after, one of these days from beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Bye-bye.